Good morning, Crossroads people, and good morning, Crossroads men. Happy Father's Day to you. Today is a great day for us because today God's going to speak to each one of our hearts. We're here as men because we want to be the men of God that God wants us to be, and today God's going to give each of us a very clear challenge from His Word. Weldon Hardenbrook wrote a book called Missing from Action, The Vanishing Manhood in America, and he describes 4 faulty models of manhood. The first of those is the macho maniac. Dirty Harry, Rambo, Clint Eastwood, Die Hard, RoboCop. Deny your feelings, ignore the law, never complain, never apologize. Just sweat and lots of sweat. Accomplish the impossible every 8 minutes. Take anything you want and bully everyone in the process. That's the macho maniac. The second false model is the great pretender. This would be the Archie Bunker type of person who builds up his self-worth by constantly belittling other people, especially his wife and his kids. He rules over his family with an iron fist and ridicules them while behind his back everybody else ridicules him. But he's frightened by the world, so he keeps everyone at an arm's length by his caustic talk. The third false model is the world-class wimp. This is the Dagwood Bumstead type of person who's so inept, he's constantly outwitted by his children, his wife, and even his dog. Nobody takes him seriously because he's a bumbling idiot. And his motto is, "Blessed are the passive, for they shall avoid conflict at all costs." And the fourth false model of manhood, according to this book, is the gender blenders. This is the Michael Jacksons, the Boy Georges, the Princes. They don't even pretend to be masculine. There's quite a lot of confusion of the roles there. Their identity is in serious crisis. People magazine had an article by a psychologist who interviewed his 7-year-old nephew and asked whether Michael Jackson was a boy or a girl. And this nephew said, both. The American male is suffering from an identity crisis of epic proportions today. Is there any alternative than just buying into this crisis of identity? You bet there is. Let's look at the Bible and we'll see God's model for manhood. Keep this in mind. A person's greatness isn't determined by the value of their wealth, but by the wealth of their values. A person's greatness isn't determined by the value of their wealth, but by the wealth of their values. In Philippians 2, God's Word gives us 5 key values, which you'll find in every great person. Epaphroditus and Timothy model these 5 values. Of Timothy, Paul says, "I have no one like him who will be genuinely concerned for your welfare," Philippians 2:20. And just a few verses later, in Philippians 2:29, of Epaphroditus, Paul says, "Honor such men." God's model for manhood includes 5 characteristics. The first one is that God is looking for men of compassion, men who put relationships before results, people before profits. So he gives us the example of Timothy. And Paul says, I've got no one like him. He puts relationships before results every time. Men, we focus on tasks and results way too much and not nearly enough on relationships. We need to work at this. The greatest things in life aren't things. In Matthew 16, Jesus said, "What will it profit a man if he gains the whole world and forfeits his soul? Or what shall a man give in return for his soul?" We've got to look at our relationships with God and with each other. People last, profits don't. Relationships are eternal, profits aren't, right? I mean, when was the last time you had money that didn't find its way away from you so quickly? How easily we get busy with business and forget our relationships. Family, co-workers, friends, neighbors, strangers, needy people, even homeless people. We have a relationship with everybody. And this is what Paul says in Philippians 2:21 about most people. He says, they all seek their own interests, not those of Jesus Christ. In other words, they're all wrapped up in their own affairs. But the man who's all wrapped up in himself isn't a daddy. He's a mummy. The average father spends less than 2 minutes a day with his children in serious conversation. And how can you develop relationships like that? You can't. Oh, son, I'd love to play ball with you, but I don't have time. Or, hey, sweetie, I'd love to help you with your math, but I can't. I'd love to do this, but I don't have time. I've got to go make a sale, close a deal, run a race, do whatever. You see, we've got to get a balance here. God's looking for men with compassion who put relationships before results. When you put people before profits, it actually makes your business more profitable. Did you know that? In his book, Leadership is an Art, Max Dupree has some things to say about that. He's a CEO of one of the 10 most admired companies in America, according to Fortune magazine. And the whole book is about how you put people before profits and you actually become more profitable in the process. So God's looking for men of compassion. He's also looking for men of consistency. Men who put character before conformity. I'm not afraid to be different from culture. I'm not afraid to stand alone for what's right, because what matters is consistency and character. I don't care what anybody else thinks. I don't care what they're doing. I'm going to do the right thing. Tom was the vice president of a company, and he wanted to make some ethically upright decisions. Others wanted Tom to make some unethical decisions, and he wouldn't do it. As a result, he got fired. And a year later, they hired him back as president of the company. God honored his efforts. I believe that God honors the efforts of all believers when they put God first. One of my favorite examples of this is those who are farming. I believe God honors Christian farmers who put him first in every aspect of their life and their farm management. And I believe God even provides for them in very tangible ways through their crops and through the yields, and it's just amazing to watch. In 2008, professional football quarterback Tim Tebow refused to attend the Playboy preseason All-American Pro Football Gathering and photo shoot on the basis of his faith in Jesus Christ. Even though the weekend was going to be completely wholesome, according to a magazine rep, he said, "I'm a Christian. That's not right. I won't have anything to do with Playboy magazine. I don't even want my name printed in their magazine." Character before conformity. Most players would be jumping for the chance to have that kind of publicity. You want to know what Tim's net worth is? Well, to explain that, let's do a little play off of his name, Tim, because in Philippians 2:22, another Tim, Timothy, there's a statement about this. He says, you want to know Timothy's proven worth? You want to know the kind of person Timothy is? You know he has served me in telling the good news as a son serves his father. Tim Tebow grew up in a Christian family. His father and his mother both were uncompromising in their Christian values. They taught that to their kids all their lives. Before Tim was born, his parents became missionaries in the Philippines. And while they were there, she became pregnant with their fifth, who would be Tim. And she became pregnant and shortly thereafter developed a disease which could have been very hard on her body. In fact, in many cases, is fatal. And the doctors there advised her to have an abortion. And she said, absolutely not. We don't believe in that, and we trust the Lord. One way or another, he's going to take care of this. And a few months later, Tim Tebow was born. You want to know Timothy's proven worth? That word proven literally means tested character, both for Timothy in Philippians and Tim Tebow. He's a man of conviction. You want to know what convictions are? An opinion is something you'll argue about, but a conviction is something you'll die for. And God is looking for men of conviction. You know the old saying, if you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything? You bet. What would those who know you best say that you stand for? Would anyone say that you have convictions about, say, this or that? They might know what your favorite football team is, but do they know anything more about your life? If not, why not? People who make an impact with their lives are people of conviction. And historically, those who've made the greatest impact in the world, anywhere in the world, they weren't the smartest or the most educated or the wealthiest. The people who changed the world had the deepest convictions, for good or for bad. They believed in their convictions from the depths of their hearts, and they lived them out. And men, you and I have a temptation to be half committed to a bunch of things, rather than be 100% committed to the things that really count. But God's looking for people of conviction who put character before conformity. Proverbs 10:9 says, "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but he who makes his ways crooked will be found out." The world's interested in image. God's interested in integrity. Image doesn't last. It's going to be gone overnight. Whoever was on the cover of People magazine 3 months ago, who cares? But character lasts a lifetime. It's not your image that counts, it's your character and integrity. That's the bottom line. So let me ask you, men, is your private life consistent with your public image? If it's not, you need to be evaluating that. Too many men have this Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of thing. Are you the same person in private that you are in public? Are you the same person on Facebook that you are here on Sunday morning? We need to be constantly evaluating our lives and asking ourselves, is my life consistent with the biblical values that I say I believe in? Now listen, inconsistent fathers, men, are you listening? Inconsistent fathers produce insecure children, and unreliable husbands produce unstable marriages. Proverbs 20, verse 7 says, "The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him." God's looking for men of compassion and consistency, but also for men of cooperation, men who put cooperation before competition. See, Paul was a spiritual superstar, perhaps one of the most gifted men to ever exist next to Jesus himself, yet he recognized that even he and all of us, we accomplish more when we work together. And we've got to get past this not my idea syndrome. My ideas are good and your ideas are good, but when we put our ideas together, we have great ideas. And Paul says if you really want to make an impact with your life, you need to be a person who cooperates with others. You don't want to be a lone ranger or a hot shot. You work with others. So right here in this passage in Philippians 2, we get 3 biblical images of cooperation among believers. Chapter 2:25, Paul says, "I have thought it necessary to send to you Epaphroditus, my brother, and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger, and minister to my need." God expects us to develop relationships with other believers for 3 reasons. First is, right out of this verse, we have the same family. Paul says about Epaphroditus, my brother. In other words, we're related. The Bible calls Christians brother or brothers 133 times. It's the term most used to describe the interrelatedness of believers. Some of you grew up in churches where you call each other brother and sister all the time. I think it's a great term. It's a warm term of endearment. It says we're all in a family. So this guy said to me, he said, "I heard you talking about the church as a family all the time, but it wasn't until I had a crisis that I learned how this stuff really works." You see, the church is a family, but it only becomes your family if you choose to get involved, if you choose to develop the relationships where you have an extended family of brothers and sisters to come alongside of you and to help you when you go through a tough time. See, we have the same family. We also have the same job. Paul says of Epaphroditus, fellow worker. We're given the same task, the same mission. We work together, we serve together, and we have the same battle. And it's the duty of all of us and each of us to support, to defend, encourage, and bandage each other when we get wounded in this battle. You're not going to make it in life as a Christ follower on your own. The people that God uses are men and women of cooperation, and we all need real friends. That's why we talk over and over and over here about finding and getting involved in a life group because we need other people and relationships need to be developed. You say you don't need it? Well, you think you don't need it right now, but you do, and the time's coming. In 1939 in a stadium in Munich, Germany, 100,000 young men and women gathered in support of Adolf Hitler. And in that stadium, in various colored shirts, they formed a message all the way around the stadium that said, "Hitler, we are yours." And they nearly took the world. What would happen if Christians, if even just the Christians in this room would say, "Jesus, we are yours"? God's looking for men of compassion, consistency, cooperation, and fourthly, God's looking for men of commitment. Men who put the cause of Christ before comfort. He says of Epaphroditus, and we read the first of these verses already, but Philippians 2, 25, 26, 27, "I have thought it necessary to send you Epaphroditus, my brother and fellow worker and fellow soldier, and your messenger and minister to my need, for he has been longing for you all and has been distressed because you heard that he was ill. Indeed, he was ill, near to death, but God had mercy on him." Here's the story. Paul's in prison in Rome. And there's this church in Philippi who decided to take an offering and to send that money to Paul to pay for some of his bills, maybe, for candy bars and sodas while he's in prison. And they've got a guy in their church who said, "I'll take it to him." And his name was Epaphroditus. Now, not a small errand, because it's 800 miles between Rome and Philippi. No boats, cars, planes. He's going to make an 800-mile journey on foot. Think about that. That's a pretty serious commitment. Epaphroditus is saying, "I put the cause of Christ before my personal comfort. I'll make the 800-mile journey on foot to deliver this offering to Paul because that's what needs to happen for the kingdom." But while he's on that trip, he gets some kind of infection and he gets a disease and gets really sick. Evidently, it's a deadly disease because the word that's used says that he was ill, and it's the same word that's used in other parts of the Bible where people actually got sick and ill and they died, like Lazarus and Dorcas. We're not talking about post-nasal drip here. He got some kind of a deadly disease and nearly died. Have you ever been on a business trip or a hunting trip or anything else and just gotten really, really sick? You know how miserable that is? And you're thinking, all I want to do is get home. Epaphroditus didn't turn around. He didn't cop out. He didn't turn around and go back to Philippi. He kept going all the way to Rome. He delivered that offering and eventually got back home. He was persistent despite the fact that he was in pain. He was committed to finishing the task. Men, God's not impressed with great starters. God's impressed with great finishers. How are you doing there? How are you doing with your families? Have you even started well? But more importantly, are you going to finish well? Too often we take the easy way. We cop out. We put comfort in first place. Sure, we want the cause of Christ to be first, especially when we're here on Sundays. But then we say, I'll live for the Lord when it's convenient. Like, I'll go to church as long as there's not a good game on that day. The true ministry that God is calling us to costs and exhausts. God's looking for men who will pay the price. In James 2:17, we read, "So also faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead." And what this means is that I only believe the parts of the Bible that I put into action. Because if I don't put them into action, then I don't really believe it. God's looking for men who will put His word into action. God's looking for men of initiative who put feet to faith, doers of the word, who put the cause of Christ ahead of their own comfort. So God's looking for men of compassion, consistency, cooperation, commitment. Our last point for today is that God's looking for men of courage. Courage to put service before security. You take risks for God's kingdom. You serve God and others with reckless abandonment. Philippians 2:29 and 30. So receive him in the Lord with all joy and honor such men, for he nearly died for the work of Christ, risking his life to complete what was lacking in your service to me. Wow. We're to honor men like this. Men who risk their lives for the sake of Christ. Men who put service ahead of security. That word risk is actually a gambling term. It means hazarding. It's the same word used in a crapshoot, the rolling of dice, stacking everything on the roll of those dice. And that's what Epaphroditus did. He put his service ahead of his own safety and security. He was, in a sense, a great gambler. He gambled his life away for Christ. And I ask myself, is my commitment to Christ deep enough to cause me to risk anything? How about you? Is your commitment to Christ deep enough that you would take risks for him? To risk your time, your reputation? Like, ooh, what will people say? To risk your finances? When God tells you to do something, are you willing to do it, to take the risk? We sit here week after week after week, and so many times God tells us things, and then we either just conveniently let it slip out of our minds, or we just outright refuse to do it. Oh, man. God is looking for men who are more committed than this. I care really deeply about this topic because I think today a lot of churches are filled with wimpy Christians. Christians with no teeth, no challenge, no commitment, no sacrifice. We don't have any more heroes because there's no dedication. Instead, we sit around and we sip tea together. But God wants this church to be full of people who know what they believe, why they believe it, and who put their beliefs into action. That's what counts. That's what makes a difference. In Romans 12, 1 and 2, Paul writes to the church in Rome, I appeal to you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal or complete change of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. We're called to offer our lives as living sacrifices. The problem with offering ourselves as living sacrifices is we can crawl back off the altar. We make a commitment, and then when it gets tough, we crawl off the altar. We come to church on Sunday and we sing, I surrender all, and by Monday we're AWOL. Men, let me ask you, what are you offering to God, to whom you owe everything? Are you offering God your time, your talent, your tithe? God says, give me back the first 10% of what you make. He says, do that, and I promise I will take care of you. Are we willing to do that, or do we just listen to it and acknowledge it and then not do it because it doesn't seem so convenient on payday? God's looking for people who put service before security. How will your family do this, men, if you don't? What's God doing in your life? What's he telling you to do? What's it cost you to be a Christian? That's the mark of greatness. In Mark 8:35, we read, for whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake in the Gospels will save it. In 2 Chronicles 16, we read, the eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to give strong support to those whose heart is blameless toward him. Why are there so many unfulfilled men? Perhaps because they've lost the spirit of adventure. They don't have anything truly significant that they're living for. But men, life is more than just a career where we work and retire and then die. God never meant for me or you, for any of us, to use all of our time and energy on our careers. He wants us involved in service and ministry to him, impacting our families and our communities and our world. God is looking for men of compassion, consistency, cooperation, commitment, and courage. But Paul said about Timothy, I've got no one else like him. Why aren't there more godly men around? Why are they so rare? The greatest challenge, men, that you face in life is the challenge to be a man of God. Will you accept the challenge to live 100% sold out for Jesus Christ in front of your family, your friends, your neighbors, your business associates? This isn't for wimps. Will you man up? Are you man enough to do it? Timothy and Epaphroditus were just ordinary Joes. 2,000 years later, we're still talking about them. Millions of people have read their stories. Why? Because they were men of value, and they were men of great values. What's going to be the long-term effect of your life? I want mine to count for eternity. I don't want to sell my Savior, my family, my church, or community short. How about you?